Today on Recruiting Roundtable, we're discussing a topic that is constantly evolving, and that's pay transparency. Depending on which state or province, if you live in Canada, you live in, the laws are slightly different. And today we have two people leaders who are both based out of California, but work for companies that hire across the United States and internationally. Joining us today are Ariel Fink, Director of People Ops at NRG, and Caitlin Kamm, Director of People and Growth at Envoy. So thank you, Ariel and Caitlin, for joining us. So let's just start with some intros. Please just kind of introduce yourself and a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your company. Let's start with Caitlin.
Hi, so great to be here. My name's Caitlin. I am Director of People Growth at Envoy, which is a workplace management software. It's a platform solution to make sure that everyone, where your employees are and make sure they're coming on site and that they can get their manage their rooms and everything.
Perfect. Thank you. And I was actually in New York recently. I think I used your product. It helped me.
Oh yeah. We're definitely out there. It's awesome.
Yeah. It helped me sign into. I was visiting a customer, so I think it was a QR code or something. It was pretty seamless. So I think it's a great product. All right, Ariel.
Thanks, Sean. So I am Director of People Operations at National Research Group. We do a lot of cool things, but we are leading global insights and strategy at the firm of Intersection and Entertainment. So we have amazing clients. The best part of working at NRG is the people. And we also we have offices in California, New York, and London, as well as Singapore, but we are remote. So we have a global footprint. We're everywhere. And then, as mentioned, just the best part of working at NRG are the people.
That's awesome. Thank you, Ariel. And lastly, my name is Sean Huynh. I'm host of this podcast. And it's sponsored by Rocket, it's the company I work for. We take a scientific approach to recruiting. We combine our talented recruiters with our AI model we've trained over 7 years and our programmatic sourcing techniques to help our clients find and engage candidates in ways that aren't possible with LinkedIn. Okay, so pay transparency. It's a very interesting topic. I think it's going to be a juicy one. Let's just start kind of in general, like philosophy, right? Do you feel like pay transparency is important? Do you feel like it's something that's necessary? Do you feel like it's something that's long overdue? Why don't we start with Ariel?
Thanks, Sean. I do. I think it's important to really emphasize openness, fairness, and then it's proactive. So we're giving people information, and each day something new comes up. And I think it's really important to understand the future of what this is. We're reducing pay inequities across gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and other dimensions. And so when it comes to the philosophy, bring it on. It's great. It's something I think that has been needed for a while, and we've towed around the topic, but now due to legislation, it's time. And I think it's really an exciting time, especially in the people realm.
Mm-hmm. Caitlin, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think it's absolutely necessary and overdue. I think we saw the first transparency laws come around Colorado in 2020, with California following New York last year. And we can see that it's definitely a trend that's expanding. So there's clearly interest, and it's clearly accomplishing, at least in part, some of the goal to address pay inequities. So I do think that it's very essential. I think we are still trying to figure out how these laws really make sense in practice, and how we can essentially turn what is like a compliance measure into something that is going to be the foundation of, say, our transparency philosophy, right? Making it into an opportunity to really show prospective employees how you make decisions around compensation.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of this topic, like how big of a conversation piece is it within your people, talent, HR, leadership team? Is it something that is a constant conversation, or is it something that has just been more prevalent recently? I'm curious as to kind of the internal dialogue around this. Maybe we'll go back to Caitlin on that.
Totally. Yeah, we are constantly talking about it. All stakeholders, right? Whether it's a prospective candidate is asking for the range, whether it's a current employee who's looking at maybe moving into a new role and wants to understand what the comp implications of that are, or whether it's senior leadership trying to understand what kind of the monetary implications might be if we grow to a certain size, how we're going to make decisions around equity, things like that. So I think all stakeholders have a pretty vested interest in the kind of pay transparency approach that they take. And I think it's all going to come down to what companies, their culture, right? And kind of the makeup of who they are in terms of what will make sense for them. Anything, that's over and beyond the compliance measures. But certainly candidates are talking about it, current employees are talking about it, execs are talking about it. So it's still very much in conversation, even though, right, we've only had like a few states so far pass those laws.
Mm-hmm. Ariel, what about NRG?
Business imperative, Sean, and again, very much aligned with exactly what Caitlin said across all stakeholders. And it's just so important to build and take the necessary steps to build or update a solid foundation in our job architecture and educating the workforce. I mean, we do a huge push around manager and leadership development at NRG. And then additionally, it's just in our practices, everything that we do, high performing teams, but really it's all going back. And this is again, business imperative, top of mind for everyone. And we are personally building the foundation for that, which some things have existed. I've been at NRG for 2 years now, but we're just continuing to expand and build and iterate. And it's just, again, it's just such an exciting, line of work. And the things that we're doing are just really, really helpful across the entirety of the organization and across our field as well. I think the overarching, we're getting better as companies because we're coming from a place, we're giving these data points, we're being transparent. And again, I just think that's a huge opportunity.
Mm-hmm. And sticking with you, Ariel, let's talk more about the benefits. You've touched on a few of them. Both you and Caitlin have kind of touched on them. But what do you think are some of the main benefits of implementing pay transparency for your company and the employees that work there, and the great people that obviously you enjoy working with every day?
Yeah, it stems from transparency, as we've talked about a bit, but I think it makes people feel valued. I guess, just to ask a question, do you remember the first time that you found out, maybe you're early in your career, but you found out someone made more money than you, or they had a different title, and it was your first touch point? How did that make you feel? I can speak for myself and say someone in the same role, same title, same experience, just starting out. And I think they made a lot more. And I was like, oh, what did I do wrong? Did I not negotiate my salary? So I think now it kind of takes that out. And personally, for me, that's my previous experience. And then now it really helps people come equipped to the conversation to say, hey, this is what I'm worth. If you're a candidate internally, if you say, hey, I'm Caitlin and I want to be, this is my role, this is what I'm worth, and you have those data points to really build a case, especially around performance reviews. If you're a top performer, it really helps guide the conversation. You're equipped with all the facts, the organization is equipped with all the facts, and then there brings that level of transparency. And after, let's say you have that conversation, you walk out of it feeling valued. So I think it's a win-win either way.
I guess I went from the interviewer to the interviewee, I guess, because I want to answer your question. I have an interesting story to tell. So I was a director of sales at a company. You can look at my LinkedIn. I'm not going to name the company. You can just look on it and you'll find it. And my boss hired a salesperson, an account executive that was going to report to me. And I interviewed this person, but the offer negotiation and everything, I was not in the loop on. And I remember finding out after this person was hired that he had a higher salary than me. And it just, it happens, right? Like, I started my career at one point, and when I joined the company, I only asked for X salary because that was a jump for me at the time. But for this individual, I guess they had a higher salary already. And to get them to join, we need to offer a higher salary. And their salary was higher than mine. And it was really immature at the time. I found out I wasn't happy. I ended up firing that guy after a couple months. And I think the pay transparency thing was a part of it, right? Because I was young. It was my first direct leadership role. And for whatever reason, I couldn't see past it. So it's not something I'm proud of. And I think that I've grown from that. And I've learned that look, people make different amounts. But to your point, that's how I felt. I did something about it, which maybe I shouldn't have done. So, Caitlin, what about you? What are some of the big benefits you see from implementing pay transparency?
Yeah, I mean, just to that, Sean, to your example, I think, and this is exactly, I think, also what Ariel was talking about in terms of the being able to trust your organization and their decision making at the end of the day, right? So, of course, these laws have come about to address pay inequities, right? To make sure that people aren't being paid more than someone else. But at the same time, it is this opportunity for us to be more transparent. And I do think that companies are taking advantage of that because they realize that it builds trust with their employees. I think the other piece to that, though, is you really do have to educate folks on your comp philosophy to make sure that you're getting that benefit, right? Because with knowledge, with great knowledge comes great responsibility, or, with knowledge comes responsibility, right? And so we want, if you have this information, right, especially if you're part of a company and you're trying to figure out, right, how we make decisions around compensation, it's important to be educated on this, right? Because not everyone is going to make the same amount of money in the same position, right? Because it's a range. It's a range for a reason, right? There's a lot of things that go into how you decide to comp someone. Where are they in the world? How much experience? What other skills do they have? Right? There's so many things that go into figuring it out. But if you can provide your methodology in a comp philosophy, which really, generally is like about a page, you do end up addressing a lot of kind of the concerns and the distrust that arises when people don't know what's going on behind, this mystical curtain with compensation.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's such a great point that you bring up. It's building a culture of trust. I think that's the main thing, right? Like people want to trust in their manager and trust in the company and know that there's, I guess, transparency. That's the word I was looking for. Don't want to overuse it, but that there's transparency in the org. Obviously, I've been in the recruitment agency space for going on 5 years now, and in 2021, a lot of companies were hiring very aggressively, and they were hiring. And let's talk mostly on the tech side, like software engineering. And you saw the salaries were jumping like exponentially within months. And I remember having conversations with engineering leaders and talent acquisition leaders saying well, I would say well, if you want this person, this is what the market rate is. But they're like, if I hire this person at the market rate, how does that affect everyone else that's already on my team? Right. So I want to bring up one point and then get both of your feedback. So I was looking at the pay transparency laws for the state of California. And one of the laws is employers must disclose a position's salary range to current employees upon request. So let's talk about that, right? You release a new job, you put the range out there, or maybe an employee comes and asks you, and it's different from where they're getting paid. Like, how do you navigate those conversations? Let's start with Ariel.
I'm so glad you asked this because it's important. And now people know, your employees know, and they will ask. So therefore, we as people leaders, Caitlin and I, have to be prepared to navigate these conversations as well as partner with managers. And ultimately, when you are asked, you have to come from a place of, hey, this is why. This is your job, this is your role. But also, if there's an opportunity, if there hasn't been the internal benchmarking for current people who are in seat, it will come. And when it does come, be prepared is what I would advise. And actually, I want to key in, Caitlin, on Modern People Leader, I think you said you don't have to have all the answers. That was your career advice, I believe. And that's okay, because if you don't have the framework and the key, the foundation that you need to speak from, that's also okay as a people leader, as a people manager, but you need to be building it. And I think if you come from a place, again, we talked about the trust and the transparency, that's how you build it. But you also have to be accountable, not just because your employee's asking, it's now compliance driven. But I would just say that when you are in those situations, especially if you're a newer people leader or manager, it's okay, but just make sure you're doing the groundwork to build the foundation, the career framework, and then just to come from a place of facts and say, I don't know, to Caitlin's advice, but then I'm building it. And again, I think just being accountable for that.
Mm-hmm. Caitlin?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And by the way, no one is going to be like, what I will say is that you can't make everybody happy on this stuff, right? Like, you might come out with a philosophy and you might have certain ranges that don't work for some people. And you're going to, individuals are going to have to make decisions that are right for them. But the point is that this gives them at least a little more data in order to do that, I think. But yeah, I think that, I think internally it's very important. Because if we want to address the pay inequities, that's the whole purpose of these laws, is to make sure we're not having pay gaps. It's really important that you are looking at your internal folks and seeing, like, okay, where are we sitting in comparison to the market? How does that compare to 6 months ago? Right? Where do we want to position ourselves? Are we 90th? Are we at the top? Are we trying to hit middle of the road for our industry and our size? These are really important questions that you have to ask and figure out in order to make sure that you are paying the talent equitably across the organization.
Look, I don't envy the job of a CFO in this situation, because like, if you look at just something like the minimum wage increase in California, right? I've been seeing articles about this. I think it's $20 an hour, right? And especially in like the fast food industry. And you're hearing a lot of companies saying, well, your food prices are going to go up, or some businesses aren't going to be able to stay in business because like the economics don't make sense. So I think there's like other aspects of this too that you have to think about, right? Like, if you have a 20 people org, it's a little bit different than if you have a 10,000 person org. And, um, yes, current employees have a right to know, like, hey, the person you're hiring with the same job title as me, if that pay rate has gone up 20% and they're making 20% more, well, do they demand a 20% raise, like, across the board? So, like, I'm curious if this issue has come up at all, and like how companies are, thinking ahead, right? Like, do you just say, hey, we can't afford to pay you, and you let them walk? Or do you like have a negotiation on compensation? Like, how have these kind of situations played out, if at all, in your companies? Maybe we'll start with Caitlin.
Yeah, there are companies that, for example, just say they don't negotiate on offers, period, right, to maintain that. Other companies will maybe negotiate up to a certain percentage, and that's sort of predetermined, right, so that recruiters know when they're getting to that offer stage. But I think it's going to depend on the organization and what's right for them. But to your point, yes, people are allowed to talk and share their salary information at work. Like, we can't say, don't tell your friend how much you make, right? So people do share this information. They find out, how much people are being paid. And I think that's the point of that. That's why the education piece is so important, because the fact that it's a range really can't be emphasized enough, right? And it's not a huge range, right? We're talking about like 85% to like 115% kind of a range. And so, depending on where that person is experience wise, right? So if you have HR business partners or play that role, like, those folks can come in and help articulate why the comp is the way it is, right? Like, maybe the person is in a particular location where there's a geo discount. Maybe the person doesn't have as much experience. Maybe they're new to the role. So there's I think there's a lot of factors. And so for us, like, the way we've been able to sort of transparently talk about this is have a pretty transparent, like, leveling framework where we show you in the organization what your career chart will look like, depending on whether you choose an individual contributor or a management route, and what kind of skills you need to get as you go up the ladder. And then, right, each ladder for each job family has their own, compensation information for how the market's going to comp positions at each level in the org. So I think when you take a pretty methodical approach and then educate around that, it's sort of more palatable for people to understand how someone in a similar position might be making a few K more than they are, for example.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot to unpack there. I want to talk about the location and also the leveling, but I want Ariel to jump in and give her feedback.
Yeah, I would just add everything that Caitlin said is spot on. And then additionally, something that has been another layer to throw in are total compensation statements. That's something I've experienced in my past, and equity and bonus and benefits and all of those elements really tie in. So if there's a focus just on the salary range, great, there should be, but additionally, are there other benefits? Do you offer a great educational reimbursement to help people grow, because that's rooted in your philosophy for development? I would say that. And then I would just say again, to add to the people who are having the conversations around compensation. So Caitlin mentioned HRBPs, all levels, including leadership. Just make sure that it's not often what you say, well, here's a career framework, you fall in this and that's that, but making sure to take the time, how you make people feel. We talked about it earlier in the call, but how you make people feel, especially around compensation, can be a deal breaker. And it's just something to really drive and make sure that we're doing our due diligence there with a lot of care and concern.
Yeah. I want to kind of circle back to a point Caitlin brought up about location discounts. So when everyone went remote in 2020 through 2021, most companies were almost fully remote at the time. We had a lot of clients where they had differing kind of like approaches. Some would say the role is remote. This is the pay band. I don't care if you live in Idaho or New York or San Francisco. This is the pay band. Others had sort of more of like to steal Caitlin's term, like a location discount, right? Like if you lived in an urban center where cost of living was higher, you'd get paid a little bit more. If you lived maybe in another, maybe like a rural setting or somewhere else where the cost of living was lower, the pay band was a little bit lower. So with remote roles and pay transparency, how do you like navigate that with, potentially different pay ranges for the same job in different locations? Maybe we'll start with Caitlin, since you kind of brought this up. I'm going to unmute you. Or you can unmute yourself.
Hi, there we go. Sorry about that. Yeah, I think, there was a trend, right? So I think standard practice has been to compensate based on also certain locations, right? And certain ones are known for, right? Like San Francisco is always at the top of the market, things like that. There was a trend for, as we were moving into these like more remote kind of distributed workforce arrangements, that that there are certain companies that did do away with geo kind of discounts. And I think that for those companies, I've seen it mostly with like remote first, fully distributed organizations where there isn't as much of like a location tethering them. Whereas other companies that are distributed, right, but maybe aren't like fully remote necessarily, I have seen that they have kept the geo discounts. And I think that, a lot of the companies that did make the decision to do away with those are now having to, in this economic environment, have to reevaluate those decisions and say, like, what were we trying to accomplish there? Did we in fact get the top talent right? Because the goal is to get the best talent, regardless of location, when you have a comp approach like that. And I don't know whether or some companies may have seen that benefit, others may not, but certainly in an economic downturn, I know things might be turning around right now, but when you have a down market, I think all of those costs, all of those financial decisions go under a microscope. And the question is like, what's the outcome we're really trying to drive with this decision? And did we accomplish that effectively?
Mm-hmm. The kind of sad truth is like a lot of those people that were hired during that time don't work for those companies anymore.
Right. Exactly.
It's
And then
like,
layoffs.
it's
And
almost
then,
like there's been a massive like reset button that was hit, right?
totally.
Ariel, what are your thoughts, comments on the remote work and location-based salaries?
I just would add that the tools that we're using, right? LinkedIn seems to be one of the best. Salary.com, the Bureau of Labor Statistics for the United States. I mean, I think just looking at it from a global perspective is really important, and then using the right tools to help equip you with the right information to make the most informed decisions. So Caitlin really did a great job of explaining, and same Sean. So not much to add there.
So you've just stole my next question, which is like tools. You mentioned a few, but is there a process that you go through within your people team to ensure that the salary bands that you do have are competitive, or like, with what the market is? Like, how do you ensure that, what you're paying for a software engineer or a salesperson is competitive with, what's being paid in the market?
I think the beauty of it, our people are equipped with that information. So we just finished our performance review cycle, and people came to those conversations prepared. And I think it's on both sides. We build the career framework, we have the skills set forth, what it looks like to progress. So I think, with this pay transparency, with the right tooling such as LinkedIn, and others that we've talked about, plus the internal commitment that organizations need to have, that's really, I think, the path. And if you don't have it, again, it's okay, but make sure that you're taking the right steps to build.
Mm-hmm. And Caitlin, what about what you're doing at Envoy? How do you ensure that, your salary bands are competitive?
I would the first kind of and also plus one to what Ariel said, there's a lot of, kind of approaches that you can take, but I'd say one of the big first steps I think that's super helpful is just levels, and just organizing your organization into levels, because that allows you to then go out to market and compare those ranges against what you see out there.
Mm-hmm.
So from an internal perspective, I'd say the leveling exercise is pretty crucial in making sure that you have an appropriate thing to benchmark externally and then compare to where you sit in market.
Yeah. So I think what I'm hearing is it's not just the location, it's kind of the leveling, it's the whole, you got to have like a whole, almost like a matrix of how you do this. And then you should be able to like roll this out like effectively. My hope, and this is going to be the last question, is that let's look moving forward into the future. Eventually, there will be pay transparency for everybody, right? Like when people got hired before the laws came in, there in a lot of ways wasn't pay transparency, but eventually there'll be a level playing field, right? So what do you think that effect will have on the future of work and the future of recruiting once, this has been around for 10, 15, 20 years? Do you have any insights or thoughts on how you think this will kind of affect the future of work and how people engage with companies and how people recruit? Let's start with Ariel.
Again, it just all goes back to trust. And I think that's where, in the past, right, we weren't supposed to talk about pay. Now we do, and we do it because we're required to, and we need to be prepared. And I think just taking those steps to have really solid foundations, it's on social media, and making sure that we're aware, and your job architectures, just as we've discussed throughout, but that's what I think will be the next step in being really clear across organizations and equipping both sides, the employer with what they need, the talent that they really need, which Sean, I know you could speak for days about, but then just making sure that this transparency across all levels of the organization, it's not going anywhere. And then we need to be more open and transparent, especially with our data. And I think that's the future. That's how people will feel valued and feel like there's trust within the organization. And if you don't, unfortunately, you may face the consequences. People, may question wanting to work at your organization. And again, we have to do better, and make sure that we're online and practicing best practices as we continue forward.
Amen to that. I mean, civil penalty. I'm reading on my chart here. Civil penalties are between 100 and 10,000 per violation in California. So you better be careful. Caitlin, do you want to take us home? How do you see this affecting us down the line, 10, 15 years down the line?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to impact. Like already, it's changed the norms, the cultural norms that like even what Ariel was saying. Like when I was first getting into the workforce, it's like don't ask what they pay. You just show them that you're a great worker and that you're dedicated. And now it's totally different. It's like the sort of flipped on its head, right? And so the questions that candidates are asking now are the opposite in some cases of the questions we would have been asking, before. So I think it's going to fundamentally shift, and I think we're already starting to see it, just the norms and the social contract that employees have with their employers. I definitely think just there's going to be more and more transparency, and with generative AI in the mix, who knows, like, right? So I think there's just so much, there's a lot of good, there's a lot of opportunity. I also think that it will go hand in hand with folks upskilling and reskilling and that mobility within the organization as well. So a lot of shifts will come from this, I believe.
That's a really great point. Knowing that, hey, like if I gain these skills, or if I, excel at whatever it is that I'm doing, this is the next gate for me. I think that's definitely something motivating. Ariel, Caitlin, I really appreciate both of you. This is a great episode. I learned a ton from both of you, so thank you for coming and sharing that with us and for our listeners. And yeah, until next time, thanks for tuning in. This is Recruiting Roundtable. Have yourself a great day.